They had dressed him in chains like a penitent, though he had nothing left to confess. The iron bit at Tyrion's wrists and chafed the bones of his knuckles raw where the manacles slid with every step. The steps themselves were slick with old courtly polish and dust, and the dust had a tang of chalk, and the chalk tasted like fear. He could not keep his palms from stinging on the iron, and every sting seemed a bell ringing in a city that had grown expert in bells. Weddings and deaths and false pieties, ringing all day, ringing even when the clappers fell still, ringing behind his eyes. They led him to the yard because the gods preferred spectacle. The painted table of the small council bore a green cloth this morning, and the dais for the hand had been moved so that Lord Tywin might sit in shade while the sun broke itself on everyone else. The crimson canopies of House Lannister were not draped today. There was no need to shout a name already shouted in every alley. The early light fell clear and straight into the training ground, and the sand lay pale as bone dust, raked in straight rows like a carefully tended grave. He could smell oil, gallons of it, worked into leather and steel and the black shaft of the Dornish spear, the pitch of it threaded with the sweeter reek of oranges, the perfume of the day. Prince Oberyn had come wearing Sunspear's fruit on his skin, and the scent ran like memory past every nose. Tyrion lifted his eyes and found the prince at once because everyone found the prince at once. He was impossible not to see. The viper's hair had been braided into a single rope that fell between his shoulder blades. His eyes were the color of tea left to cool, and his mouth almost smiled. Almost. "Brother," Jaime said softly at his shoulder, as if they were two boys once more and the yard was Casterly rocks and the dust only the dust of practice. But Jaime stood back because this was no practice and no boyhood together would save them. The white cloak flowed from his shoulders like bleached tidewater. It could not make him younger nor hand back his right hand nor undo any of the days that had spilled since. "Watch," Tyrion told him. "If you cannot save me, at least do that much." "I will save you," Jaime said, the way a man told himself he would not drown if he kept his eyes open. "Father will have to. Father will have to do as fathers do," Tyrion said, and kept himself from glancing at the shaded dais. He did not need to glance. He could feel the weight of Lord Tywin's regard like another chain. When had that gaze not been a manacle? It had always pressed on him. From the first day he knew what a father's pride was supposed to look like and learned that his own portion would be its shadow. Around them court and city had poured into the holds of the Red Keep. Lords and their bright wives, knights gleaming like saints, butterflies of silk and cheap linen moths had all found their perches. The high septon sweated in layered crystal and cloth of silver, and when he raised his hand as if to bless the combat, he only blotted the shine on his brow. Mace Tyrell hovered importantly near the dais with a smirk that had to practice to be that effortless. Grand Maester Pycelle busied himself with a scroll that did not need his busyness. Cersei had chosen the sun. She stood where it could gild her hair and sheath her in honest light. She wanted light. She wanted everything to look like justice when it was done. Tyrion did not look long. He had accustomed himself to not looking at Cersei. A man could go blind on that brightness and not for any goodness of it. Illyria Sand sat in the shade with her ankle over her knee and the heel of her sandal flicking very softly. Her hand lay light on one of the sand snake's wrists. Tyenne's perhaps, or Obara's. No, he corrected himself, those were not the elder daughters, not in King's Landing. Oberyn had brought his paramour but not his brood. The hand was light, nevertheless, and the heel continued its small tick forward and back as if it alone moved in the city and everything else were still. Across the pit from where Oberyn stretched, cat-like, unhurried, the spear resting along his arms, Ser Gregor Clegane stood with the patience of a mountain. His visor was lifted. His face was a ruin. He had made of his body a boulder that had rolled down ages ago and would roll again at the first push. There were men in the crowd who could not bear to meet that gaze. There were women who would not look away. Tyrion saw only that the mountain breathed in slow drafts, and each draft swelled the world and let it sink again. The great sword in his hands lay as easily as a river branch. He remembered the sound of his nephew choking on his wedding crown. He remembered his mistress' eyes when she'd seen the coin. He remembered laughter and his own mouth, so clever and full of knives, running on toward this moment like a foot toward a pit. There was nothing left to do now but watch a dance between a serpent and stone. Tywin lifted one finger. The herald blew his horn. The sound cut the air like sheet iron torn. Tyrion's tongue went dry. Oberyn began to move. It was not quick, not at first. He went forward as if agreeing to a conversation he had put off, in a long, easy line, the way an oarsman might take hold of a river by stroking it. The spear was more an old friend than a weapon. Only at the last instant did its point describe a small bright circle that caught the sun. "Ser Gregor," Oberyn called, and his voice carried without shout. "You know why I've come." Gregor did not answer. The visor came down. The mountain made a small grunt like the earth considering how it might shift to crush a village without expending itself. "You raped her," Oberyn said. "You murdered her. You killed her children." Somewhere below the general murmur, a man snorted nervously, as if the old lines were a play he had heard twice and did not expect to enjoy a third time. Cersei's mouth did not change. Tywin's hand rotated an inch on the arm of his chair. Oberyn's ankle rolled and the spear point kissed steel near Gregor's hip. It did not bite. The kiss left a noise like a glass rim stroked with a wet finger. Gregor's sword came around in answer, heavy, contemptuous, a farmer's scythe to clear a snake from his ditch. The spear bent around that arc and found empty air again, as if it had always meant to be exactly where the blade was not. He is not fast because he has no need, Tyrion thought, and he is fastest because he has no need. Some men moved with an urgency that announced their fear. The Viper moved with a patience that announced his certainty. A second pass, a scrape on a pauldron, a flick at a knee, a testing tap on the rim of Gregor's helm. The third went lower, and the fourth, and the fifth, and then the dance acquired a pattern. A long note, a short note, a long, long silence, a tap, and the tap became a bite. When it bit the first time, the spearhead tore a leather tie near the greave, and the sound of it ripping was indecent in its intimacy. It sounded like a bodice parting. Men laughed because they could not help themselves. Oberyn did not. He drew a circle with the spear, and the sunlight ran along its edge like wine along a cup. Gregor pushed. He did not rush. He pushed as a glacier might, in the only direction the earth allowed. The sword struck the shaft, and the shaft shuddered. The ash held. The bindings held. Tyrion saw dark lumps at the spear's head, nodded along its base, and smelled something in the oil that was not oil. Manticore, he thought, or list tears, or some sweet Dornish venom they raise in jars like honey. Another kiss, another chew. A bite, finally, deep, so that the spear went into Gregor's upper thigh where the mail parted to allow the leg to move. Oberyn turned his wrist. The head twisted. When he withdrew it, red came, first as if someone had broken a fruit, then as if a gate had been opened. Gregor's sword came down like law. Oberyn was not where the law said a body must be. He slid aside, and the great sword buried itself in the sand a finger's depth and dragged a trench and rose, and its rising through pale grains into sunlight. When a man that big bled, it made everyone else smaller. Tyrion felt it, the shrinking of the yard, the way sound drew closer. Even the bellies of the ladies in pale gauze seemed to draw in under their bodices. The high septon's rings made a creaking that might have been his joints. Jaime's left shoulder shifted fractionally forward as if his body would go to help even if his new balance would not carry him there. Cersei did not move at all. She was a statue that had been taught how to sneer. "Say it," Oberyn said, and his eyes were merry in a way that was not joy. "Say her name." The spear flicked low, flicked high. The point scored the dark slit of the visor and left a bright scratch like a star. It struck shoulder, thigh again, the meat of the calf. It found the weak place where a pauldron met a breastplate and worried it like a terrier until one of Pycelle's apprentices made a little noise in his throat and a courtier beside him clapped a hand over the boy's mouth to make it a cough. The spear was too supple to break, too greedy to stop. It ate law in mouthfuls of blood. Gregor began to breathe in little snarls. The sword grew heavier. It had always been heavy as a day's work, and now it was heavy as sin. He stepped forward, and the wound in his thigh opened in a dark smile and ran. He stepped again. He had the patience of a mountain and the mind of avalanche, blind, inevitable. He had the small mind of pain now too, and pain made him faster. He bellowed, and the bellow was not words, but it was close to a word. It meant kill. Oberyn did not goad him closer this time. He went sideways, drawing Gregor on a crooked line meant for goats, not for war horses. He let him swing, and each swing cost the big man the weight of another cup of blood. He let him drive, and each drive dragged the leg and tore the world again. When Gregor made his rush at last, the real one, the last one, the waiting on all morning one, Oberyn's spear turned snake and struck not at the face he had been naming, nor at the chest where men died in poems, but at the ankle. He drove the head between the greave and the boot and pulled. It made a small sound, and the big man's foot broke with a wet powdery crunch, and Sir Gregor Clegane, who had walked through villages like weather, stumbled. The yard let out a breath it had been saving for years. Gregor did not fall. He knelt. For a heartbeat he was a penitent too, as Tyrion had been when they brought him up in chains. His sword wavered. The spear was already at his throat. "Her name," said Oberyn Martell, and he leaned forward and put the iron just beneath the chin in the little jonquil of soft flesh there and pressed. The spearhead pricked and bled him there too. "Say her name and say who gave you leave." All the morning the prince had been smiling only in the mouth. Now the smile ran up into his eyes. Not the smile of amusement, but the long curve of a bow bent near to breaking. The bowstring trembled. He had him. "You," Gregor began. Speech was a rough cloak on him, and pain had worn holes in it. "You." "Softer," Oberyn murmured, as if to a child promised sweets for truth. "Speak sweetly to me now. Tell me what you did and who set you to it." He could have finished it. Tyrion knew it in his bones. A small twist and push, a kiss not on steel but in flesh, and the mountain would be only a hill, and then sand, and then whatever men called mountains when they were no longer mountains. But Oberyn wanted something robbed to be given back in daylight. He wanted it with the hunger of a man who had starved a long time and stood now before a table. Lannisters loved tables, Tyrion thought, and almost laughed. Gregor's breath rasped. He tried to lift his sword. The point cut a slow letter into air. He tried to stand. The broken foot said no with a little pop that made men swallow. "Tie," Gregor said. He choked, coughed, spat phlegm and something redder. Oberyn eased the spear a hair to let the breath pass. "Tywin." The name landed like a stone dropped from a city wall. There was no way to dodge it. It struck everything and everyone it could. The High Septon's hand found his breast and clutched. Mace Tyrell's mouth opened and shut without sound like a fish. The smirk touched no one now. The yard had edges again, and all its edges were knives. Oberyn's eyes closed for an instant, as if the light had suddenly been too much. When they opened, they were not merry. They were flat brown and very old. "Louder," he said. "Tywin Lannister," Gregor growled, and something in the growl was relief. He was the instrument and had found at last the name of the musician, and instruments liked names. He said, his lips worked. "No gwalling." Do it quick." Ilaria Sand's heels stopped ticking. Somewhere a gull cried as if it had just learned human speech. Oberyn drew breath to speak again, and Tyrion saw how this could all unspool wrong, even at the lip of success. The prince had given the mountain blood and rope to talk, and men who talked sometimes remembered they were men and bit. He would put his mouth to the words he had wanted to hear all his life, and the mountain would remember the way a hand feels around a skull. But the spear was already there, and the shaft did not tremble, and the manticore knots along the socket gleamed. Viper, Tyrion thought, do not lean too far into the song. Take the head. Perhaps Illyria's hand twitched. Perhaps Oberyn, in some part of himself that had never drunk nor fought nor smiled up at men, he meant to bed heard the dry voice of his elder brother in Sunspear. Patience is a fruit we eat whole. Perhaps the name itself sated him for a beat. He did not lean. The point did not leave the throat. The spear turned slightly, a physician setting a tube. "Say hers," he asked, and the words were not gentle. "Whose bed you broke with your bulk. Whose face you did not like the look of and made a flower of blood." "Elia," Gregor said. because whatever else he had forgotten, there were names he could not. Elia of Dorne. Oberyn's breath left him in a sound like a man who has been holding a plank above his head and at last lets his arms drop. He took 2 steps back, very slow, as if something were applied to his ankles like weights. He lowered the spear. He looked down at the blood on it with an expression that was not triumph and not grief. It was the particular nakedness of a man who has discovered that the revenge he has dreamt is a door that opens on another room, empty of what he thought would be waiting there for him. He raised the spear again and drove it up under the jaw with a single clean stroke that pushed iron into palate and brain. The sound was final and without romance. Gregor's hands fell open, a little surprised. The sword fell. He thudded onto his back and the earth received him. He was big enough that the sand leapt in a ring and poured back over his lines at once, erasing him even as he lay. For an instant no one moved. A court full of bodies thought together. Is it done? Can we speak? Can we breathe as we did at breakfast? Does the sun go on? Is that allowed? The herald's horn remembered his job first. He blew it, a foolish, ordinary noise now, and broke the charm. The murmur rushed back in, changing into sound like a river glimpsed between houses and then found at the end of a street. Oberyn set the butt of the spear into the sand and leaned on it because even princes must lean when they are tired. He looked over at Tyrion then, truly looked, and his mouth found its version of a smile again, gentler but no more joyful. "The gods have spoken," said the herald. "The gods have decided," echoed the high septon weakly, as if the god's voice had passed through him and wrung water from his bones. Lord Tywin did not move. He might have been carved there, antique oak with a heart of iron. His eyes had the calm of deep wells that never reflect the sky. The only sign he had heard anything a mountain said was the slight whitening of knuckles where his right hand gripped the arm of his chair. "By the justice of the gods," Pycelle intoned, finding his voice as well. "Tyrion of House Lannister is free," Jaime said under his breath. It was not a legal word. It was a prayer. "Acquitted?" Pycelle finished and sniffed, and blinked up at Lord Tywin for the flicker of a nod that would allow custom to go on breathing. Tywin inclined his head not even a finger's breadth. It was consent, and it was the promise of a reckoning carried in the same small motion. They brought Tyrion a key and made a little ceremony of opening his chains. The key was older than any of the boys holding it, and it turned with stubborn dignity. The irons clattered around his feet, and the sound of them dying on the sand was almost obscene in its intimacy. Jaime reached as if to clap his shoulder and closed his hand on the air between them. They had not yet practiced how to touch one another as men. Ellaria reached Oberyn in 2 strides, so light it looked like a trick the yard performed for them, and her hands were on his face, his shoulders, his ribs, as if she counted him again to see whether he was all still there. He laughed then, a small laugh, and the laugh sounded thirsty. "Water," he said, as if he had wandered long among dunes and found the word at last. Ellaria put her mouth to his ear and whispered something. He nodded once. He did not look again at the corpse. One of the King's Landing butchers, a human one, not to be confused with the professionals of war, had crept forward up the edge of the yard to stare, as if wondering what cut he would call a mountain's haunch. Cersei came forward with the slow grace a woman uses when she will not be seen to hurry. Before the dais she stopped and curtsied to her father and the king. Tommen sat stiffly beside Lord Tywin with his small hands on the arms of his little throne. He had grown in the last weeks as children do when the world demands they sprout. His feet did not quite touch the sand. He looked at the dead man the way a child looks at a broken toy, too exactly like a person to be thrown into the rag bin yet too ruined to play with. Solemn, guilty for wanting, relieved to be relieved. "My lords," Cersei said. She did not look at Tyrion. She did not look at Oberyn. She looked only at her father and then a degree lower at the boy. "Justice has been served. Justice has had a course," Tywin said, and his voice could have frozen wine. "It remains to us to attend to the law." The law could be anything in Lord Tywin's mouth. A rope, a bridge, an altar, a knife. Tyrion wanted wine more than law. He wanted to sit in shade and pour something red into himself until his hands steadied. He wanted to not be looked at. He wanted 1,000 unwise things. He settled for standing very straight and breathing. The air tasted of hot iron and oranges and light bread from the kitchens. Men had begun to talk in step tones, this to that to this, and the talk was already a rumor. Tywin would knit it, he would cast it off again. That was his art. You will return to your chamber until the formal writ is drawn, Pycelle told Tyrion, as if he were bestowing a kindness. At once, if you please. A man may be acquitted by the gods and still be required to salute the realm ordered by men. A lesson for us all, Tyrion said. Shall I be permitted a bath in men's water, or must I remain hallowed by the gods' dust? Jaime's mouth twitched. Pycelle colored. Go, Tywin said without turning his head towards him. It was always impressive how the command see would find its target at a slant. Do not speak to the press of the court. Do not speak to the ladies who will offer you their sympathy. Do not speak to the servants who will sell your words before you are done uttering them. He paused, and in the pause lived a lifetime of being spoken to that way. Do not speak foolishly. I will see you this evening. To be seen by his father was to be placed on a board and examined for use. Tyrion bowed because the form pleased the formless battle he was always fighting, and because forms were what held the world up when men kicked out all the props. His escort comprised 2 gold cloaks and a silent brother of the Kingsguard whose white helm hid a face he did not try to guess at. When they led him through the corridors of the keep, the air changed from sun-sharp to the cool, stored smell of ancient stone, and he could hear summer's flies when they found a window and buzzed their small fury against the lattice, a pitch like the whisper of women discussing the price of eels. He passed a group of Tyrell men-at-arms whose cloaks were the green of new leaves and the yellow of flowers. They made the sign for luck under their hands when they saw him. The youngest of them had a face freckled like the back of a trout. In his chamber, a pitcher of wine had been left. The gods might be unpredictable, the law dangerous, but servants were steady as stars in their habits. Tyrion poured and held the cup in both hands for a moment before drinking, as if he expected the wine to warm the metal of his shackles. They were gone, but some alloys are stubborn. When the first swallow had gone down and punched a hole in his chest so he could breathe better, he went to the window. The yard lay a patch of pale below. They had begun to move the body. The spear lay across Oberyn's shoulders as he went away with Illyria, as lightly as if it were the walking stick of an elderly man who had just strolled across the city and not killed a legend. A gull came and circled very low, as if before alighting on a harvested field. Tyrion watched it and felt, for a brief indulgent heartbeat, the pleasant shock of being alive. Then he heard what the city was saying, and what it would say by afternoon, and he remembered that everything that rose eventually made a shadow. He did not so much hear the door as feel the changed shape of the room. He turned. Jaime came in without knocking. The white cloak found its place behind him and lay like water on the floor. You did not go back to your white cell, Tyrion said, and took care to sound only amused. Have you gone deserter? I asked the king for leave to speak to his uncle, Jaime said, and the corner of his mouth betrayed him. It went down a half-finger's width at the thought of saying the word uncle and meaning the man who might have killed his son. He granted it. He is generous. He has your nose. Do not, Jaime said. The one syllable had in it very old pain and the newer pain of missing his right hand to wring it into steadiness. Do not say things that will make me pity you and thus hate you anew. I would never want your pity, Tyrion said. He wanted it daily and had since he was small. What does father want with me this evening, do you think? Will he offer me Casterly Rock and a wife of high birth if I promise not to be myself? Jaime sat down, and the movement reminded Tyrion absurdly of Oberyn's lunging ease. He looked suddenly very tired. He will want you to say that the mountain spoke while dying and that he spoke falsely. He will want you to say that Prince Oberyn goaded him and he babbled. He will want you to help him hold the door against the thing that just came into the room. What thing is that? Tyrion asked and knew. He wanted to hear it with his brother's mouth because sometimes naming a thing gave it shape, and sometimes shape was comfort. The notion that Tywin Lannister gave an order that should never be given, Jaime said, and his eyes found and failed to hold Tyrion's. He looked instead at the window, as if the sky could offer a version of his father that the floor could not. That he is not only strong, but cruel. He made a small, humorless sound, as if the one did not usually eat the other for breakfast. Cruelty wears banquet clothes in this city, Tyrion said. He lifted his cup. To the gods, who love a show. Do not goad him, Jaime said. Not tonight. Would you like me to be good? Tyrion asked. I have never had talent for goodness. I might pass for quiet briefly if I drank enough. You would die if you stayed quiet long, Jaime said. Like a fish out of water. It is a Lannister gift, Tyrion mused. To die of what we are. He walked to the window again and looked down. The sand was already the same as before except for a darker stain in one place. A boy with a rake was smoothing even that. He would be given a coin and sent to fetch something and told not to speak. People loved to tell boys not to speak. Do you think your beloved will weep? Jaime began and stopped. For a moment something naked came into his face and then was gone. Do not be an ass because you can. Cersei will not weep. She will burn. If father tells her not to, she will burn silently. If he neglects to tell her, she will set the room alight and stand in it. She hates me, Tyrion said, because the fact had the sad comfort of old furniture. She will hate me even more for refusing to die when she planned it. She will hate you differently, Jaime said. That is worse. Is it? Yes, Jaime said simply. He rose. I will come fetch you before you go to him. I do not trust the keep not to swallow you if you walk its halls alone today. You think there are jaws in the walls? Tyrion asked. I think there are ears, Jaime said and left, and the room changed shape again when he was gone. In the shade of the maiden vault a fly crept along a window pane, stopped to rub its hands together with priestly seriousness, and set out again on a private pilgrimage that would never achieve a shrine. Tyrion drank and counted, not the fly's steps nor his heartbeats. He had tried that as a boy and learned it brought only panic, but the small sounds of a day that had begun as one sort of day and would now have to become another. Bells would ring later, not in celebration but in the ancient habit of being rung for anything men could not otherwise define. He imagined the boys who pulled them, arms straining, minds on bread. Across the city, Prince Oberyn did not sit at once. He washed in a copper basin Ilaria had demanded at the prince's apartments, and the water went pink and then red and then clear again because Ilaria had them bring more and more until the color finally gave up the fight. Oberyn stood with his hands braced on the table where the basin lay and watched the outlines of his knuckles through the water. The way the skin over them looked like something stretched on a frame. Does it help? Ilaria asked, pouring. He considered. No, he said at last, and the word was simple and did not ask for sympathy. It does not help. He lifted his hands and let Ilaria dry them with a cloth that smelled faintly of lavender. He said it. I heard, she said. She had heard each syllable as if it had been spoken inside her own skull. She had heard the breath he took before Tywin. She had heard everything. Ilaria Sand was a woman who had loved men and women and mornings and wine and the words of poems. She had not loved revenge, not as Oberyn did. It tasted to her like a fruit that kept growing once plucked. Yet when she had heard the mountain say the name, her heart had made a hard little sound against her breastbone that she did not recognize, and after it quieted she had felt empty in a way that reminded her of the bleached shells in the desert, perfect and useless and too light. He turned and caught her around the waist and set his forehead against her shoulder. They did not speak for a little while. Outside in the corridor, one of the prince's guards shifted his weight, the leather creaking, and coughed into his hand as if to offer privacy like a cloak he could hold up between the world and his lord. Doran will write, Oberyn said at last, into the cloth. He will write things that are soft as feathers and weigh a lot. He will bid patience. He will speak of ships and treaties and the breath of war and how he has his hands on the bellows, not me. And you, Ilaria murmured. She tilted his face up in her hands and kissed each of his eyes lightly, and in each a new line had been drawn since morning. What will you do? Drink this city, he said. Bite it. Hold my tongue until it bleeding is all I taste. Smile at the men who will come offer me their daughters and their alliances. Then, when your heel starts to flick again, when the sandship in my breast scrapes a rock and makes me want, I will go find the Lannister father and say his name as he said hers. With no wailing, she laid a hand on his chest. He is not a mountain, she said softly. He is a cliff. Be careful when you walk under him. Cliffs look steady until they don't, and then the whole face comes down. He laughed, a real laugh this time, because Illyria's metaphors always pleased him. They were like the unknown fruits she had persuaded him to bite as a younger man, their seeds surprisingly soft against the teeth. I am too vain to be crushed, he said. I will not allow it. Pride will prop me up if strength fails. I will prop you, she said. Pride can trip a man. Then I shall fall on you, he said lightly, and kissed her. And the kiss did not taste like victory or like grief. It tasted only like her mouth with its one small scar and the particular way she breathed when she was considering whether to bite. In the Tower of the Hand, the air was always cooler, the stone thicker, the light filtered through old yellow glass that turned men into figures painted on vellum. Tywin Lannister sat alone for a time and looked at his hands. They did not shake. He would not permit it. He had not shaken when a boy's body had been dashed against a wall miles away and a woman's blood soaked the rushes in a far room. He would not shake now because an ogre had spoken a name. He had always known that the world ran on old stories. He was the author of a few. He had taught other men to tell them. He had taught his children how to be characters who survived the telling. The morning had told one badly. It had left out all the parts that made men comfortable. It had dragged a name into the sun that belonged under stone. He set his fingers together. He would not hurry. Haste was a confession. He had not confessed since he was 12, and a septon had asked him whether he had lied about a fishing net. He had then and learned not to again. Each breath came as it should. He could feel his mind making its neat stacks of arguments, the precise boxes in which to place each trouble. He could feel the law arranging itself like bones under a great body of flesh. When Pycelle came, he waved him away with a flick. When Qyburn came, in the shambling, eager way of a dog brought to meat at last, Tywin regarded him long and permitted him to speak only when the man could not bear the press of his own words. "My lord," Qyburn said, bowing, and his beard had spilt meal crusted in it still. He was a creature of kitchens as much as of surgeries. "If I might, the mountain, Ser Gregor's body. There is work to which a body of that size." Tywin lifted a hand and Qyburn stopped. "The mountain is a corpse," he said, "and a corpse is an inconvenience. You will see that it is treated with a degree of care that satisfies Dornish sensibilities but permits no procession of triumph." "Of course," Qyburn said, and he swallowed visibly. The prince will be received with honors," Tywin said. "We will call the confession the delirium of fever and pain. Men will believe it if we make it simple enough. Only lawyers love complications. And children." Qyburn inclined his head, the humility a garment he wore often because it fit, and scuttled away, no doubt already thinking how to acquire a piece of that vast meat for his studies. Tywin filed the thought beside 1,000 other human strangenesses he had never needed to be infected by to profit from. He could make use of men who loved their own peculiarities. He could put a leash on their obsessions and let them pull the cart. "Father," Cersei said from the door, and came in without asking. The yellow glass washed her to gold. "You heard him. You will not allow this to stand." "I will allow what I allow," Tywin said evenly. "The gods have been paraded. We will now return to governance." He looked up. In his daughter's face smoldered the old fire, and behind the fire a wound. He had thought once to heal that wound by offering her a crown. He had found instead that crowns are thorns that please the wounded most when they press. "He killed him," Cersei said. It was unclear whether she meant the prince or the dwarf or some third ghost she spoke to at night. "And then he said your name, before Tommen." "I will speak to Tommen this afternoon," Tywin said. "He will receive instruction in how rulers hear noise. Cersei came to the table and set both palms on it, leaning. "You should have chosen another champion," she hissed. "I chose the one who cannot be offended," Tywin said, "and let the blade's edge of it show. A cut that demanded no blood. Now go sleep, compose a face for the evening. You will not speak of this name. You will not use your ladies or your maids or your mirror as a confessor. You will be as silent as the stone of this tower. If I hear your voice in rooms where you have not been invited to speak, I will know and I will be displeased." Her mouth softened and then set again. He watched her master herself. He allowed himself to feel the smallest movement of something like pride, the way a craftsman might see a line he once cut grow straight as a daughter's spine. Then he dismissed it. Pride was a poor stock to trade in. It paid in satisfaction, which purchased nothing. "I want him dead," Cersei said. "I want his head. I want him gone from this city." "You will have to want other things," Tywin said, and returned to the papers he had arranged in a precise fan. "We are not at war with Dorne today. We will not be. We will put on a mask and call it a face. We will dine with the prince. We will tender him soft words and no promises. We will tell the city that a large man spoke like a large pot boiling over. We will tell the High Septon that the gods love the meek and hate the proud, and they will not be mocked by men who drag old crimes into sunlight. He will repeat that to the poor, who like to see pride punished. We will give the poor bread. They will forget by next week." Cersei's lip curled. "You think you can sweep blood like dust?" "I have swept worse," Tywin said, and did not look up again. In Sunspear, under a sky so blue it had made sailors weep, Prince Doran Martell sat in a chair carved with palm leaves and looked out at the water. Areo Hota stood behind him as he had stood behind him for 20 years. Solid as a wall, still as a pool on a windless morning. A letter lay in Doran's lap with its seal broken. The sun and spear had split neatly under his thumb. "He lives," Doran said. His voice was mild. Men had mistaken its mildness for indecision. Those men had all lived longer than the impetuous. Mildness is a good place to hide swords. He has what he wanted. Not everything, but the part that could be had in King's Landing. Areo said nothing. He watched a gull scissor the air and ride a draft and then settle on a piling, cocking its head. "Do not anthropomorphize birds," the maester had told him once, smiling. "They are not men with wings." Areo had nodded, but in secret he still thought gulls were messengers carrying bits of the sea's language back to land. "Now they will come to me as if I have asked them to," Doran continued. "Lords who like news will find their way. The Iron Throne will write and say words that mean forgive us. The Tyrells will smile with all their mouths and count possibilities on their flowers. The sparrow who is not yet high will sense a current and tuck his feet to float on it." He looked down at the letter again, tracing the line of Oberyn's hand where it had run a little wild in one place, as if joy and fury had tugged at it together. "My brother has cut flesh. I must stitch skin." Areo cleared his throat, a soft cough that would not have alarmed a doe. "Will you recall the girl?" "Myrcella," Doran said. He tasted the name. It did not taste bitter. "Not yet. Let her laugh under our sun. Let the Martells be seen to be gentle hosts. We will teach her our songs. We will teach her to eat oranges in the morning and dates by night. Let the realm watch and say, Dorne is patient. Dorne is not the desert men think. Dorne grows things." Areo nodded. Patience sat well on his prince. He had seen men with patience as a cloak and men with patience as armor. Doran wore it like skin, living, whole, mended where life had torn it. "Send a letter to King's Landing," Doran said. "Right? We rejoice in our prince's health and your king's justice. Right? We grieve anew for our sister and know that grief does not undo friendship. Right? We look forward to the day when the crown speaks in Tommen's voice and we hear his mother's voice as the hush of the woman who bore him. Write it all very slowly." Areo inclined his head. He had always liked how Doran could put a knife into a line and leave no blood to show it had been done. He would write the letter with his big careful hand, and the jagged men in their tall towers would nod over it and not know where they had been cut. In a room rich with tapestries depicting stag hunts and girls with elaborate hair, Marjorie Tyrell sat with her grandmother. The old woman's fingers clicked softly over their invisible abacus as she counted the lines of advantage and loss. Marjorie watched her as she had always done. It was not that she had no mind for numbers. She had a very good one. It was that her grandmothers were older numbers, and old numbers are in everything. The air of King's Landing could be measured in them. Flowers like to grow in manure, Olenna Tyrell said at last, one eyelid drooping the way a curtain sometimes wears through where the sun finds it each morning. Today we have been given a mountain of it. We must decide what to plant. Orchids or onions? Oranges, Marjorie said lightly, and the old woman's snort was a laugh hiding in scorn. Send a basket to the prince, Olenna said. With a message, we are glad you are unperforated. Make it sound as if we are incapable of speaking plainly and thus obviously plain. Offer him our kitchens for his banquet if the Lannisters grow stingy. Nothing offends a Dornishman like stinginess in wine. Marjorie tilted her head, as if giving thought to whether a garden gate required repainting. And Tommen, pet the boy, Olenna said. He will purr. When a cat purrs, a woman can hear her own heartbeat steadier. It is soothing. Soothe the mother by making the kitten jump in your lap. And be very careful of the mother's claws. Her father trims them, but sometimes he misses one. Marjorie smiled. Grandmother. Yes, Bunny? If the dwarf is free, Marjorie said, and the word free trembled slightly in the space. Not from fear, but because the room had learned to expect words to sink. He is a clever man whom no one thanks. Clever men whom no one thanks are dangerous. Only when they are bored, Olenna said. Make certain he is not bored. Send him a book on gardens. She tapped her cane on the carpet once. No better. Send him a small pie. Men who have nearly died appreciate pies. Put a note in it. What shall the note say? From those who prefer their kings to breathe, Olenna said dryly. Men who have nearly died also appreciate honest preferences. In the black cells, a woman who had testified with a voice that shook now sat with her hands clenched and counted her breaths. Shay did not weep. She had learned long ago that weeping meant giving water to salt ground. She had finally caught sleep just before dawn, a catnap that left sand in her corners and the stale taste of old wine in her mouth. When the door scraped and a jailer with a face like unbaked bread came to tell her that the man she had spoken against would not die, she did not say anything. She looked at her hands and imagined the shape of the knife she would have bought if she had kept the coin she'd thrown away. And then she imagined a ship. Ships were safer than knives. Knives had to be used. Ships only had to be boarded. Girl, the jailer said, fidgeting because she did not respond in one of the two ways he expected, crying or cursing. Didn't you hear me? I heard you, she said, and stood very slowly because a sudden move made you an object in these places and slow moves kept you a person. Is the city cold today? He blinked. It's hot as a pot, he muttered. She nodded. Heat makes men stupid. I will go where there is wind. She smiled at him then, a smile with nothing behind it, and the empty behind it made him step out of her way. When the sun had shifted enough to unseat the morning and begin to burn towards the clotted heat of afternoon, Varys found his little birds had brought him a great many seeds but not much grain. He liked seeds. He could grow them on his own. He sat in his airy chamber with its candles that never seemed to shrink and let the new arrangements braid themselves. A living Tyrion was a knot. A living Oberyn was a bow. A Tywin made of iron who had been named in public was a hinge, and one does not see hinges until a door swings. He thought of ladders and of men who mistook holes in the ground for escape. He put his fingertips together and pushed until the pads went white. Then he blew on them to bring blood back. He would speak to the dwarf before the evening, if only to see whether the man burned or smoldered. He hoped for smoldering. Smoldering men were embers that could be carried a long way and set exactly where they ought to. When dusk came down like violet silk, the city's voices changed. Day voices are sharp. Night voices grow round and thick, as if bread had been put into mouths. Lanterns bobbed and then became stars when you looked away from them. The bells of Baelor rang once at the hour, and many hands made the sign of a god they had learned to trust as far as wine, and no farther. Tyrion went with Jaime through the corridors to the Tower of the Hand. Men nodded at them because it was easier than deciding whether to bow. He felt the old twinge in his knee and adjusted his pace to make no show of it. In the antechamber, a servant offered him water flavored with lemon. He took it and then the wine that followed it and drank one, and then the other, and could not tell which he preferred. Lord Tywin received them as if nothing but family mattered and nothing had happened outside families since noon. The room smelled of parchment and a little of elderflower. Someone had sent a dish and no one had eaten it. Tywin dismissed the servants with a glance and folded his hands. "You will be quiet," he said. "You will listen to me. Then you will speak if what you say is useful. If it is not, you will go to your chamber and practice thinking." "Father," Jaime said, and the word sounded as if he had not used it in weeks. "He is acquitted." Tywin let his eyes rest on his eldest son. The look said, "I know the law. I wrote it for other men." He turned to Tyrion as one might to a bird that had flown into a room and might yet be coaxed out a window without breaking its neck on glass. "The prince has wounded a thing I needed whole," he said. "He has not killed me. I am not a man who falls when a braggart speaks my name, but he has given the city something to chew that is not its bread. I will not have the city chewing me." He moved a paper with one finger. "Tomorrow you will send a letter to the prince expressing your gratitude. It will be public. It will speak of the gods and the law. It will not mention what a dying man froths." Tyrion sipped his wine and swirled it to wake what was sleeping in it. "What if the prince mentions it every time he speaks for the rest of his life? Then we will offer him sweetmeats," Tywin said. "We will hold out a treaty. We will remind the court of the woman who bears Myrcella a kindly regard. We will invite Oberyn to hunt and to hawk. We will tire him with sport and drown him in gravy. The court is a place where storms become fog." "And if he prefers storms?" Tyrion asked. Tywin's mouth made the smallest shape that might have been called a smile by a man very far from the room. "Then we will remind him gently that no one remembers a storm after a harvest of good grain. We will feed the city. We will be just. We will be seen about the king. We will open the granaries. We will load barges with flour. We will set men to bake as if it were a piety. Men forgive anything if they are not hungry." He looked at Tyrion, and the iron in his face warmed by a degree. "You will assist in this." Tyrion bowed his head. He could feel the net settling, its mesh soft as silk, its strands strong as anchored rope. He had lived under such nets all his life. He had cut them before. He had also strangled in them. He set his cup down and found he could not hear his own heartbeat, which meant it was beating well. "Very well," he said, and made his voice smooth. "I will write. I will use words like dignity and providence and the quiet workings of fate. I will make them sound as if they were not insults. I will." "Do not be witty," Tywin said. The small shape that might have been a smile went away and left the room cooler. "Do not think that because you have been permitted to live, you have been invited to perform. I have jobs for you. You will do them." "Jobs," Tyrion said. "Not duties." "Your duty," Tywin said, and the weight of the old word fell across both sons in a blanket that had always itched, "is to your house. Do not pretend you do not know what it means. It means that when you are asked to stand where it is inconvenient, you stand. It means that when men speak my name, you watch them to see whether their mouths twist." "Today," Tyrion said softly, "another mouth spoke your name." And something in him that had been quiet all afternoon put its head up. It was not anger. It was not triumph. It was curiosity sharpened to a little hooked knife. He wanted to see what his father would do when a blade that was not his nicked him. Tywin's eyes did not move. "A dying man," he said. "A monster. The city will not remember the sound in a week, provided I fill its other senses." He lifted a hand to dismiss them. "Go, right? Sleep. Do not go to whorehouses. Do not go to the kitchens. Do not go anywhere that is not your room. You will remain clean and ready. Like a pig at market, Tyrion said under his breath as they withdrew. Jaime did not laugh. When they were alone again, he leaned in the corridor and felt how the stones held the day's heat and gave it back to palms and shoulders. The way a woman gives back a lover's touch hours after it was given, as memory. The keep had absorbed a name and would ooze it out for days. Whispers are a kind of sweat. Do as he says, Jaime murmured. For now. I intend to, Tyrion said. For now is an excellent time to pretend I am a good son. Pretend, Jaime asked, and there was tenderness in the cruelty, like honey boiled too long. You are the best son he has, because you have nothing in you he did not make. Do not make me love you, Tyrion said abruptly. I am too tired. Jaime looked away toward a torch in its sconce. The flame leaned on the iron, and so did they for a moment, as if two men could lean on fire without being burned. In their rooms later, Illyria and Oberyn lay with the windows open to let the city's music come in. The hawkers, the far-off thick laughter of men in a tavern who had found a joke to keep them drunk for an hour, the slow belling of a mule. The spear lay on the floor, and it had its own presence, like a quiet guest who had come long roads and would go again at dawn. Oberyn did not touch it. He did not need to. He had put his hands on the thing he had chased. He had heard the name. He had killed the man. He had found afterward that a name did not efface a death. He had known that in some dry, rational corner of himself and had not believed it until now. Tomorrow, Illyria said idly, we will have to eat bread with the roses. Let them cut it for us, he said. They have knives made for bread. Let them count for us, she said. They love to count. He smiled in the dark and got up and went to the window and looked out. The stars over King's Landing were messier than the stars in Dorne, blurred by smoke, closer to the sea. He loved Dorne the way children love a mother's lap. He was not a child. He had made himself remember that in the yard. He had bent the spear like a man who knows his own bones. He put his palms on the sill and leaned and thought, very briefly, of another sill, another window, another room, another day, of a woman's voice, of a baby's wail and the sudden way a room can be emptied of air. He did not weep. He had done that long ago and decided tears had bought nothing. He made a sound that was not laughter and not grief. It was more like the sound a man makes when he sees a horizon he had wanted to arrive at only to discover that it is ribboned with rivers and needs bridges. I will take mine of him, he said very quietly, so quietly that even Illyria, who could hear a coin blink on a table 3 rooms away, barely heard. Not in a yard, in a room, in a sentence, in the way he looks away and shows the white of his eye, in the day he cannot write as straight as he did the day before. Illyria did not rise. You will break your teeth on iron, she murmured, not in warning but in pride. I will feed you soup. And the city turned in its sleep, and the name went on being whispered where the torches smoked, and men with lists in their heads began to move words as if they were coins on a table, and the corpse of a giant cooled, and a boy king dreamed of kittens and bread, and the bells lay quiet for 1 hour because even bells need rest between their duties, and in that hour the silence made the truth louder. By morning there would be broadsheets, and men would swear they had seen the mountain weep as he said the name, and others would swear that the prince had his hand on the hilt of a knife concealed against his wrist, as if the spear had not been enough for him, and a woman selling eels would say that the sun had blinked. By afternoon there would be men at the doors of the Dornish apartments with baskets and invitations and girls in long dresses with their hair wound cunningly. By evening Tywin Lannister would have sent a cask of his best red with a note as clean as new parchment, and Oberyn would taste it and admire it and know it as a man knows an enemy's face. And somewhere on the black water a ship would feel a whisper of wind and turn her head seaward, and a woman with a knife-shaped mouth would stand at the rail and look back once and decide that she did not want to be a story after all, and that leaving before she became one was the only cleverness left to her. And in Sunspear a letter would dry in the heat with ink that had dried slower than the air, and a prince whose gout kept him from writing would look at the horizon and see beyond it the horizon beyond that. The mountain had fallen. The dust had not. Dust takes its time to settle. Men breathe it in the while and make from it new shapes. The bakers began before dawn. men whose arms had more years on them than the children who carried their loaves to market. The flour Tywin had ordered from the river barges came in sacks stamped with the lion, and the lion looked very fine, very heraldic, until it grew dusted fat with flour and became a house cat. Ovens were banked with wood soaked in brine so the heat would be even. Boys in shirts with sleeves rolled past the elbow-dusted boards and slapped dough with the same straightforward aggression boys saved for flies. Bread woke, and with it the city. By the time the sun lifted its red chin over the masts in the harbor, the first loaves went out into hands, and hands passed them to mouths, and mouths to bellies, and a rumor, that animal with 100 legs, tripped on crust and fell forward laughing. The prince had slain the monster, it said. The monster had cried like a baby and said the great lion's name. The prince had not only slain him but danced while doing it, a dance with steps men described with their own feet in the street until they knocked elbows and spilled figs. The prince had sang Eliah's name and the city had sang it too. No, said another rumor with sharper teeth. He merely listened, and it was the mountain who sang, in a broken voice that made even stones uneasy. A third rumor, vain as a whore in new silk, claimed the sun had stopped to look and started again only when the prince raised his spear in thanks. At a corner near the fishmonger's a woman with a throat like a heron's, long and pale and stringy, sliced loaves and set the slices on her board with little dishes of vinegar and oil. She had taken to dipping crust in oil during the cold spring when the oil had seemed joy on a day by itself, and could not give up the habit of joy now that it was hot. Lannister bread, she told her first customers, as if the brand made it keep better, hot from their lion ovens. Eat and forget whatever you are thinking. May I? Asked a round-faced boy too old to be a boy and too young to be the man he thought, and she flicked a slice at his hand with a motion so practiced it had become part of the way the hand and knife and bread and air agreed with one another. What did he say? The woman asked, because selling bread did not mean you had no mouth for gossip. They say he said a name. He said two, the boy said, chewing, and held up 2 fingers with the solemnity of a priest. One for the dead and one for the man with the living face. The heron-throated woman made the old sign over her breast, 2 fingers bent like beaks. Names fly, she said. Sometimes they come back. You'll say it then? Called a man from the edge of the little knot, grinning. Which one? She dipped bread in oil and held it out to him. Eat, she said. The name is in the oil. You'll taste it and have no need to make me say it. The man laughed and ate and told himself he tasted something bitter under the spice. He told himself many small things all day to keep himself company when he hauled eels, and the eel haul did not listen and the eels did not care, and the bread did what bread always does. It quieted what could be quieted. Up in a room with a narrow window that showed him a piece of sky the color of a thrush's egg, Tyrion spread a sheet of parchment and bled ink onto it in the manner of men who have learned that words are blows, and if you aim them well you may never have to lift your hand. He had once been a boy who filled his margins with drawings of men with asses for faces and women with swords for hair. The boy was not entirely dead. When the word Providence put out its throat and begged to perch, he allowed it, and when it tried to sing, he stroked its feathers until it fell asleep. By the wisdom of the gods and the mercy of the law, he wrote, I, Tyrion of House Lannister, thank Prince Oberyn Martell, who offered his strength at my need and proved, with valor and skill, that a man may be cruel of body and weak of truth. He paused there, amused at the neat little trick of calling the mountain a liar without saying what truth meant. The crown's justice is affirmed by trial, as our custom holds, and the Seven's will is made known in daylight. In that light we are all smaller and better ordered. He reached for the cup without looking and found water, not wine. He did not remember ordering water. He drank it anyway, because sleep had been the thin sort that wakes at a leaf falling outside and thinks it is a door. When he set the cup down he wrote, Let those who grieve, let us all who grieve, remember that grief's first duty is toward restraint. In restraint is peace, and from peace, prosperity. He sat a while admiring the fiction that grief could be taught any duties at all. A small tap on the door, exactly 3 taps spaced so evenly they sounded like a machine made of flesh, announced Varys. He came in as if the room had been built for him and he had only now found the door. He wore lavender and a smile that a child would have drawn with a blunt charcoal and become proud of. Smooth, definite, round at the edges, but able to hold water. "You anticipated me," Tyrion said. He gestured at the parchment. "See, I even used one of your favorite words, prosperity." "My favorite word is patience," Varys said. "Prosperity is a bawd who prefers houses with good windows." He came to the table and bent to the letter. He never smelled of sweat. He had replaced sweat with a powder that implied he was made of silk. "This is very fine. That line about light making us smaller is almost pious. Lord Tywin will be pleased. It is his favorite disguise." "Piety?" Tyrion asked. "Light," Varys said, as if explaining that yes, bread rises when you heat it. "Have the rats begun to eat me yet?" Tyrion asked idly. "The little ones with worsted mouths? Or am I stuffed too full of law to be palatable?" Varys arranged his sleeves like a woman settling her skirts to hide a stain. "You are being considered," he said. "That is always worse than being eaten. It takes longer and there is tea." "Speak comfort to me then," Tyrion said. He put the quill in the stand and watched a filament of ink draw itself down the shaft like a spider descending. "Tell me the prince is in love with the city and will abandon his thirst to be slaked by our fountains and not by my father's blood." "The prince is in love with the act of loving," Varys said serenely. "The city is one more beloved, and like all his beloveds, he will want to mark it." He raised a finger. Polite correction offered as advice. "Consider this. He has what he came for in part. You know what men do when they have eaten half a meal. They look at the table," Tyrion said, "to see if there is cake. To see if they are owed cake," Varys corrected gently. "The distinction is the difference between a wedding and a wake." Tyrion laughed because the laugh came up out of him and wanted to live. "And what does my father owe him, by your count?" "Not what the prince wants," Varys said, which is an admission carved into stone where pigeons may sit on it and make preening noises. "Your father owes him bread in the form of honors and wine in the form of treaties and perhaps a silver bowl of figs. But the prince will not be satisfied by fruit. Like a clever man, he may let you fill his mouth while he decides how to find the other course." Varys tilted his head as if listening to something in the next room. "A harp. You should, of course, offer the bread. Then you will know which hunger he favors." "I will go to him when my father tells me," Tyrion said. "Shall I take you?" "I have already been," Varys said, and smiled as if he had been the furniture. "He liked our wine. Ilaria liked our chairs. She says the leather is good for lying in, because it does not squeak when a woman is content." Tyrion found himself abruptly wanting to be in a room where chairs squeaked when a woman was content. "Tell me something I do not know," he said. "Tell me who is cutting the mountain." "Qyburn will stitch," Varys said. "He asked permission to keep certain parts as if bodies grow mushrooms, and he means to taste them all." He looked faintly disgusted, the way a man looks at a plate of blancmange and realizes it is made of pig. "The High Septon wants a public burning to cleanse a sin he will not name. Lord Tywin will compromise by permitting the head to go where heads go, and the rest to be taken quietly to the faith's care, which is to say the graveyards under the September men will see the head. Men will speak, and then the ovens will go on baking." "The ovens will go on baking," Tyrion repeated, and dipped his quill to continue the letter without looking. "Bread as absolution. Bread as lullaby," Varys said. "Absolution is for willful sins. Most of the city sins by habit." When Varys had gone, Tyrion read the letter again and signed it with the practiced flourish that turned his name into a little drawbridge over water. He sealed it with wax stamped with his small personal device, a badger holding a rose in its teeth, a private joke on the Reach and on himself, and sent it with a boy whose hair stuck up in cowlicks like grass around a stone. He was left, for the first time that day, without another person's breath in his room, and the quiet put its hands on his shoulders and asked whether he expected to stand up under it. He did not know. The smallness inside him, the thing that ached and called itself small to make its ache feel mathematically interesting, stirred. He had not gone to Shay. He would not. He would do as his father asked because to do otherwise today would be to indulge one appetite at the expense of another long hunger. The hunger to be the one who moved a board and saw other pieces move because of it. In a garden where roses hung like chandeliers over the heads of girls, pretending they did not know they were being looked at, Marjorie sat at a little table and taught Tommen how to feed a kitten a piece of liver without losing the finger. "You must pinch it between your nails," she said. "He loves you, but his love makes him careless." "He loves you more," Tommen said gravely, and the earnestness put a warm bit of wax in Marjorie's chest and softened a thing there that had been left too near a window. "Not more," she said. "Differently." She looked up and smiled with her eyes first, then her mouth, and Cersei, who had been standing in the doorway like a statue of herself brought to life by an unkind god, did not move. She looked as if someone had put a mirror in a corridor, and she would like to remove it and throw it in the bay, but could not without admitting to herself she had seen her face. "We will dine tonight," Cersei said without preamble, to no one and to Marjorie and to the air. "There will be speeches. There will be lies." She turned her head to the boy, and for a moment a mother came out from behind the queen like a fish from behind a rock. "You will sit on your throne and hold your back straight and take small sips. You will not eat the pie until it is offered. You will smile when your grandfather speaks." "Yes, mother," Tommen said, his fingers safely retrieved from between the kitten's teeth. "And you?" Cersei said, eyes sliding to Marjorie like the sun going behind a cloud so quick the garden thinks itself cooled. "We'll choose a gown that covers your softness. Today is for steel." "I have a gown with roses embroidered in silver," Marjorie said. "It looks like dew." "Roses are not steel, but they have thorns." Olenna, who sat on a bench with a cushion under her because she no longer trusted young chairs not to betray old bones, clicked her cane twice on the grass. "Wear the silver," she said. "Let her be reminded that dew falls and vanishes. It will be the kindest instruction she will receive today." Cersei's jaw moved very slightly under the skin, as if she ground a seed between her teeth for its oil and found it rotten. "You are audacious, old woman." "I am a live girl," Olenna said, and the cane clicked again as punctuation. "When I cease to be audacious, I will cease to be amusing, and then I will cease to be invited, and then I will cease. There is a chain to it." Marjorie made a very small gesture with her hand, the one she used on kittens whose tails quivered too near the candles. "Grandmother," Olenna said. Cersei left a smell behind her like oranges scorched. In the Dornish apartments, Oberyn sat on a window ledge and watched a sweat-darkened boy below run with a towel he had forgotten to wring out. Water fell in a little string behind him like a trail a snail leaves on a stone. He had spent an hour with a Tyrell cousin whose title escaped him, something with 3 syllables and a right to wear green in a certain order, and had asked polite questions about olives and wine, and had been politely asked about revenge. He gave polite answers that tasted like lukewarm tea in his mouth. "They will keep bringing you bowls," Ellaria said, throwing herself into a cushioned chair with the generosity of a person who has always loved chairs and people equally, and refuses to be disappointed by either. "Look, another one comes." She pointed with her toe. A page with ears too large for his head came in backwards on account of the size of the tray he carried. He pivoted at the last moment with a little flourish that made the tray wobble. Dornish boys learn swagger with their first steps, and if they are lucky nobody knocks it out of them before 10, and presented his burden with a grimace he thought a smile. Oranges, figs, a melon cut to look like an open flower, bread studded with seeds, a dish of salt, a dish of honey and wine. Always wine. A note perched on the edge of the tray, and its seal bore the golden rose. Oberyn broke it and read aloud, because he had a lover who did not like to hear words only when they cut. "We rejoice in your health, and the city rejoices in its safety. If you will dine with us tonight before the royal feast, our cooks will attempt to learn something from your tongue. If they fail, you may teach them. Marjorie of House Tyrell." "Let them learn," Ellaria said. "They will put flowers on the plate and call it dish enough." "They will put flowers and meanings," Oberyn said. "Meanings are very filling if you eat only a little. Will you go?" Ellaria asked, rolling onto her side, propped on one elbow, watching him with that lazy, unblinking regard she used for men she had decided not to devour in one sitting. "Yes," he said, "I will go everywhere today. I will be seen drinking every man's wine and eating every woman's olives. I will be the friend they think they always had. I will make the tight places in their faces loosen. Then tonight I will be the guest Lord Tywin invited when he was young and made of flesh instead of iron, and he still thought pleasure a thing to be had near a table." "Do not lean too close," Ellaria said without heat. "Iron stains cloth." At the training yard, Jaime's sword met a polearm and clanged in a way that made his left forearm thrum. The Kingsguard sparred with him with a respect that felt like pity with its hair combed. Island Pain gave him what he wanted: silence and a blade that did not remember yesterday. The mute's eyes were as empty of contempt as they were of praise. They were not empty of attention. That would have to do. Jaime's shoulders were sore. The left had learned to do something the right had always jealously kept for itself, and it complained like a steward given a bucket. He stepped in, tried the cut he had been practicing alone at dawn, under and up, letting the weight pull the blade into an arc. Felt it bite wood, not flesh, because Ser Island slipped it as he should, and felt the flaring little pulse of anger in his throat that came these days when his body did not obey a memory. He took a breath and let it out and found a thread of laughter. "Do not go easy," he said, and the words were absurd, and he knew it but wanted to hear them said. "The city will go easy on me today. You must be the man who hates me." Island Pain tilted his head. The little scar at the corner of his mouth. How had that gotten there? Had Jaime ever asked himself that question? Twitched. He came at Jaime then with the kind of economy a butcher uses when laying out a carcass to teach a boy where the cuts are. Jaime answered as best he could and let his body be humiliated in the interest of a future where humiliation would be a memory he could choose to look at or not. When he broke, panting, wiping sweat from his lip with the back of his wrist, he saw Bronn leaning on the rail with an expression on his face like a lord examining a new crop. "You're less hopeless today," Bronn said cheerfully. "Either that or I'm getting older by the hour." "You've come to sell me something," Jaime said. Bronn had the particular smirk people in trade get when they find themselves among knights who pretend they do not know what value is. "I've come," Bronn said, "to see whether your little brother intends to drink himself into cleverness or out of it." He jerked his head toward the Tower of the Hand. "Tell him I can be bought cheaper today than yesterday." "Why today?" Jaime asked. "Because the man who used to pay me in certainty," Bronn said, "has been named by a giant in front of a yard full of people, and certainty has hiccups after that." He spat neatly onto the sand, not as an insult to the ground but as a statement to his own mouth. "I'll always take a purse from the man who admits he has none to spare." "Be in the antechamber at dusk," Jaime said, before he could think better of it. Bronn grinned. "Dusk," he said, "the hour when men remember they forgot to pay for what they ate." The Tyrell feast before the feast was a perfumed net. Marjorie's silver gown did indeed look like dew. It made men feel they had woken early enough to see something other men had missed. Olenna sat like a carved root sprouting new shoots, and put a hand out, soft as a moth's wing and as insistently as a moth will find a candle, to catch wrists and utter things in a voice that never seemed to travel farther than the person addressed, though the room rearranged itself to hear her. Loras wore his chivalry like a shirt that fit very well. He spoke to Ellaria of Sand and said he meant to ride in it, and Ellaria told him Sand sometimes likes to swallow men to test their humors. He laughed obligingly, not understanding he had been told a truth. Oberyn allowed himself to be flattered by bread the color of good wood and cheese that had been kept in a cave with bats for a year to improve its flavor, and permitted his pleasure to show because pleasure in public is a sort of diplomacy. Marjorie drifted toward him like a ship left to tide. "My prince," she said, and dipped in a curtsy that would have looked modest if the bodice had not been cut as it was and if her eyes had not been what they were. He inclined his head as if to a goddess who had decided to concern herself with mortal affairs. "My lady," he said, "your house knows how to press the sweetness out of grass." "We make hay of many things," she said amiably, "even men." "Do you?" he asked, eyes crinkling. "And what do you do with the seed?" "Plant it," she said. "We are practical gardeners." She laid a hand for an instant on his sleeve, the lightest possible claim, and in that instant made the room understand that she and the prince were not enemies. All jest aside, you have the thanks of the city. Doi? Oberyn asked mildly. I did not come for its thanks. Of course not, she said. One never comes for what one can be sure of. One comes for what one may be denied. She broke bread for herself and took nothing else and stood with it, simple as a picture of a saint feeding a beggar. There are many denials in the air. You will take that air into your lungs and make it seed oranges, Oberyn said. I will take that air into my lungs and sing to a boy until he thinks he dreamt it himself, Marjorie said. Oranges are for summer. Kings are for always. She dipped her head to Ilaria as if to a sister from a house adjacent to her own garden. You will like the music tonight. We asked for a song from Dorne, if the players know it. They will, Ilaria said. Someone has slept with someone who has slept with a Dornishman, and the song came along for the ride. At sunset, the king's feast opened like a book of hours. Braziers were lit along the walls, and the smoke from the meats laid out for men who thought meat meant safety climbed and spread its broad leaves against the ceiling. Tywin arrived as if he were the last piece of a machine slid into place by a careful hand. He stood by the king and spoke with the same clarity he used to give orders for death and for taxation. He spoke of law. He spoke of the gods. He spoke of bread. He spoke of the small boy who had the misfortune to be anointed where his brother had been loved. He never spoke of the mountain or of mountains, or of men who lived on them, or of women who died because they lay in rooms that were not built to withstand the world. Oberyn raised a cup at the appointed moment and spoke in answer of peace. He said the word 3 times in different registers, once as a toast, once as a wish, and once as an insult so fine it found its mark without anyone who did not own the mark seeing it fly. He spoke Elia's name only to Ilaria, as if it were a pet name, as if it had nothing to do with any of this. After the meat and the speeches and the dance where lords pretended to be nimble and ladies pretended to be helpless at being nimble, when the servants had begun their private feast on plates that had been trod too full for noble stomachs, Tywin sent for Oberyn alone. Ilaria stood to follow, and Tywin's man said, Alone. The word had the quiet of a sword laid on a table. I will wait, Ilaria said, and kissed Oberyn twice, once for bravery and once for stubbornness. I will count the ways he tries to win, and we will put them to music later. The tower of the hand smelled of vellum and wax and the faint animal hint of old leather. A den kept by a beast that had learned not to stink of its kills. The fire was banked. Tywin did not sweat in summer. He greeted Oberyn the way he had greeted kings when he did not have to bend, with an inclination of the head that admitted the existence of other heads. My Lord Prince, he said, you have our thanks for participating in our law. Your law is as interesting as most, Oberyn said. He took the chair offered and crossed one knee over the other with a laziness that was not laziness. It seems to end where your hand begins. Tywin regarded him for a time. He had a gift for regarding that made even courtiers used to being looked at feel suddenly conscious of their pores. You say that because a dying man spoke my name, he said. Shall we begin there and not waste our time? Let us begin, Oberyn said. I have always liked beginnings. They imply someone intends an end. Tywin did not pretend not to hear. Ser Gregor Clegane was in pain. He was not a man accustomed to it. It made his mind wander. He did not know what he said. I did not order him to do anything that is now spoken of in the city. I will not order you to be silent, because you will not remain so. I will instead make it unnecessary for you to speak. Oberyn smiled, but gently, to show that he could. You prefer necessity to virtue. Virtue is a sermon, Tywin said. Necessity is a road. He folded his hands, and the fingers made a roof small children might play at. Dorne will have what Dorne asks for, within the bounds of what the crown can give without crippling itself. We will reaffirm what was promised to your father. Your niece will be a queen when the king has done with his lessons. Your banners will fly in King's Landing on days of triumph. Your ships will be permitted certain liberties at our ports. Your merchants will pay a little less on wine than men who have not killed monsters for us." He paused. "You will say nothing about a thing you cannot prove and I can deny. You will accept that denial as the price of what you may actually grasp." Oberyn looked into the small, uncompromising lake of Tywin's eyes and saw his own face reflected and distorted. He imagined for a moment pushing the chair back and speaking very softly, the way he spoke to men who were about to die and had not yet realized that the last joy left to them was to do a difficult thing well. It would not matter. This was not a yard where a spear's point could find a seam in a cuirass. This was a room where iron had grown inward. "Your monster was not delirious," he said, "but I am willing to pretend." "That is all we ever do in public," Tywin said. "We pretend our appetites are different than they are and call that different civilization." He let out a breath that barely moved the air. "If you wish to fight me, my lord, you must do it with ships and gold and houses full of men who will stand to die when I tell them they will not. The rest is decoration." "You think I am a man of decoration," Oberyn said, "because I wear rings and take lovers and have been known to throw a cup when no one watches. You do not know how much of me is a knife." Tywin's mouth did that small nothing that might have been called a smile by a tailor's dummy. "You are a knife," he said. "So am I. Let us consider what we cut. If you cut me, what will bleed? Bread. If I cut you, what will bleed? Sand." He leaned forward. For the first time, something colder than courtesy showed in the room, the way a draft shows and makes a candle lean. "Let us cut our enemies. If we cannot agree on who that is, we can begin with hunger and then move outward." "Start with hunger, end with hunger," Oberyn said. "It does like being the middle as well." "Then do not starve your people of what I can pour," Tywin said, "and do not starve me of what I ask." He let the least possible weight come into his voice and show under the cloth. "You will not teach the king to fear his grandfather, not with old stories, not with new ones. You will be content with oranges." "I will take lemons," Oberyn said, rising. "They are sour and perfect for making men make faces." When he was gone, Tywin sat a while and looked at the chair where the Dornishman had been. He had felt, briefly, something akin to admiration, the kind a swordsman feels when another man's point pauses at the exact place it should and does not thrust, because both men know the third man in the room is the floor. He set the feeling aside. Admiration was as useless as pride. He called for a scribe and dictated the grain orders for the next 2 months. The measures fell from his mouth like pebbles knocked in precise patterns down a slope. After, he sent a note to the High Septon, inviting him to sit alone beneath the great window in the Sept of Baelor at noon tomorrow, to receive instruction about what it means when a city eats. In the stables, a horse with a white blaze down its face sneezed and stamped. The stable boy, small, with one ear larger than the other and a way of moving as if he were always listening to a song only he heard, smoothed its neck and told it a story about a prince who had hit a giant between the eyes with a spear and had not missed because he had pracked. "Iced on flies. It's true," he told the horse, and the horse snuffed at his hair. "Some men have a way with killing and some men have a way with bread. The ones with bread always win in the end, unless they choke." Across an inn table 40 miles away, the hound heard a farmer say that the mountain had fallen and wanted to laugh and did not. Laughter was a thing that hurt like coughing when you had a bruise. If you pressed the bruise with laughter, you learned where its edges were. He set his cup down very carefully so it would not spill, because that seemed important in the instant after the words. "They say he begged." The farmer went on. "A man with bad teeth and the satisfied cruelty men acquire when they live mostly among animals. Begged for his mother. Men as big as that have mothers too. They must have. They don't carve them out of oaks." The hound lifted his eyes, and the farmer saw them and shut his mouth like a bag. Arya, who had been counting the knives in the room and who held a different sort of silence like a blade in her lap, looked at Sandor Clegane's face the way a child looks at a new map and tries to remember where the rivers run. "Is it true?" she asked, because she had decided questions were better than prayers lately. "It's something," he said. His voice was a gravel road men were too cheap to repair. "A man I know is dead. That is always true." He thought of a boy's head held near a brazier until the skin smelled like pork, and of a girl's toy burned as if the toy had aired. He thought he should feel something like joy and found instead a clear place in him where a noise had always been. The clear place did not feel like joy or like grief. Felt like after. He wasn't the sort to beg. They say he said a name, Arya said stubbornly. They say he said somebody told him to do it. Do you know any names? I know names, he said. He took a drink. The drink was poor. The innkeeper had cut it with water and a certain blanch of fear that always made its way into cups when men like Sandor were present. He set the cup down again carefully. The only one that matters is the one I won't say. It sits in a man's mouth and stains his teeth. Say it to me, Arya said, leaning forward. She had not yet learned that leaning forward announces what you want and makes it easier to take away. Eat your stew, he said. You need meat more than names. I need names, she said, but she ate, because he told her and because the meat was better than the meat she had eaten 3 nights ago. She chewed with her lips pressed tight and thought of lists. Her list had changed. It had lost one name. That was supposed to feel like the list getting shorter, like catching a fish and taking it off a hook. It felt like the list had grown a shade longer to make room for the space the name had left behind. She swallowed and thought, I will not say his name tonight, and it felt like not looking down from a high place for fear of tumbling. She would look down tomorrow or the night after that, when she had bread in her. Near the river, a barge pulled by 4 men from Maidenpool who had decided, long ago, that they would never go to war on land when the river could be their war forever, slid past the stone pylons of a bridge and into the city's shadow. On its deck, under a tarpaulin that looked like old skin and smelled of tar and onions, Shay lay as still as women learn to lie when they must pretend to be asleep in beds where they are not. The bargee's boy had brought her a piece of bread, and she had broken it into exactly 4 pieces and eaten 3 and tucked the 4th under her tongue to taste later if fear came and she needed to know her mouth was her own. She would change boats at dusk. She would be far from the city when the last bell of Baelor rang tomorrow and men said a prayer to a god they half believed in and wholly feared. She would not be a story. Stories are handsome thieves. She would be a woman with a scar in a place no one sees unless invited, and a way of not speaking the name of the man who had been her best and worst thought. That would be her cleverness. In Sunspear, Doran Martell had the gout flare in his knuckle, and when it flared it made him think of summer lightning far out at sea. Small, contained, warning of bigger storms where the sky had more business than yours. He put his hand in a bowl of cool water and watched the change. I could forbid him, he said to Ariohota. I could recall him. You could, Ario agreed. And the water could forbid the sea. Doran laughed. A small laugh, because laughter of any greater size knocked on his bones from the inside. He will write to me of tables and knives and men with hair like wheat. He will ask for permission to be necessary. I will give it slowly. In the meantime, we will send a ship with oranges and a new sort of wine that tastes like apricots and smoke. We will be generous where we can afford it. Men remember generosity as if it were love. They forget revenge, Ario said. They forget other men's revenge, Doran said. They remember their own. I will remind our people of theirs without letting them think they must feed it with blood every day. He took his hand out of the bowl and wiped it with a cloth. The skin wrinkled like fruit left on a windowsill too long. Write again to the lords of the Tor and of Starfall and Salt Shore. Tell them nothing. Ask them about the harvest. Ario nodded, pleased in the way he was pleased when a blade slid into its sheath without catching. They will say the figs will be late, he rumbled. Then we will pretend to be surprised, Doran said. It is good for princes to be caught by figs. Night wore the city and the city wore night. Tyrion slept a while, the first true sleep since the yard, and dreamed of a table that ran the length of the throne room, and on it the heads of lions carved in bread looked so real he was ashamed to bite, and when he did they bled wine and called him small in many different languages, each of which he understood. He woke at a scratch at the door and thought for a wild second of doors that open on fathers with crossbows and then of doors that open on fathers with words, which is worse. It was neither. It was Bronn. You sent for me? Bronn said, stepping into the scent of parchment and elderflower. wrinkling his nose as if paper offended him. "I have space in my day. I want you as I always did," Tyrion said. "Between me and the men who have more friends than I do." He poured wine for them both and watched Bronn's eyes as he set the cup down. The Sellsword's eyes did not watch cups the way poor men watch cups. He watched doors. He watched corners. He watched the crease in the rug where a man might slip just so if he rushed. "My father will prefer me to go nowhere and do nothing. That is an argument I can only resist with care. If I must move, I would like to move with a man who has very little to lose by telling me the truth." "The truth is expensive," Bronn said and drank. "But I'll give a discount for an old customer. They are hard to keep alive." Tyrion slid a purse across the table. Bronn picked it up and weighed it with 2 fingers, as if it were a bird he meant to judge by its bone. "Do not fetch my lady," Tyrion said. The words came out before he had gathered them for inspection. He let them go and examined their backs as they flew. "If you catch the scent of her, do not bring it to me." "I wasn't going to," Bronn said calmly. "She got herself a boat. I like a woman who goes to sea when the wind is still. She does not waste what she has." Tyrion looked away for a long moment because otherwise the room would see his face. The room had seen enough this week. "Keep me from fools," he said. "I am afraid of them more than anything." "You can smell a fool like smoke," Bronn said. "It's the clever ones who stink like nothing." He put the purse away, and the sound of it vanishing into his coat was like a mouse going under a floorboard. "You've got one clever one at your elbow already. He smells like lavender and he moves like pudding." "I will let him move," Tyrion said. "Pudding is oddly useful when men try to stab it." He raised his cup in a toast to something he could not name and drained it and did not refill. When it was very late, when the torches burned blue at their tips and the servants yawned and stood in corners with their heads touching the stone because stone holds a coolness even a human head will make friends with, Cersei went down to where Qyburn kept his little house of scraps. She had taken to him as a woman takes to a dress she sees herself in by accident and decides the accident is fate. He looked up at her with an eagerness that was very nearly beautiful in its ugliness. On his table lay a great bundle of cloth that made a shape like a man who had eaten too much and fallen asleep. "You must not call for fire," Qyburn said without greeting. "Not yet. There are organs that like to be told goodbye in certain ways. I must attend them." Cersei did not blanch. She had never been the sort of woman to fall back before words. She stepped closer. The cloth moved with a new sort of tide under it. "Can you make me a man?" she asked. "One who will stand where this one stood and frighten children?" "I can make you a shadow of a man," Qyburn said. "Shadows frighten children better than men do. Children know shadows are made from their own bodies." "Make me one," she said. "Make him silent and obedient and very large." Qyburn smiled with his gums. "You will owe me," he said in the sing-song of a child begging for a sweet. "I always owe men like you," she said. "I pay when it pleases me, and I never pay in coin." "You pay in corridors," he whispered. "I have always wanted to be allowed to walk in certain corridors." She looked down at the bundle. Somewhere under the cloth, flesh made the small sounds of a winter room at dawn. "Walk where you like," she said, "if you bring me a shadow." He nodded and put his hands under the cloth and did something that made the cloth heave as if something left it. Cersei watched with the curiosity of a hunter in a foreign land, impressing herself with the animal's shape, not its soul. She had long ago stopped believing men had souls unless she wished them to. When morning leaked back into the world, Tyrion had already gone to the kitchens to look at loaves. He stood with a master baker who had flour up his forearms like frost and spoke of yeast as proudly as a knight speaks of destriers. "The thing is alive," the man said, bending to peer at the spongy dome in a crock like a priest before a relic. "You must feed it, and it will feed you." "Bread as God," Tyrion said, amused. "We should change the prayers to suit." "We change prayers all the time," the baker said carelessly. "It is only the men who say them who pretend otherwise." Tyrion had the sudden sense of standing in a room where he had been once before and said something different, and there had been a knife in the sentence he had used then. He left the ovens and their holy heat and went out into the morning and let the sun put a hand briefly on his hair. The way a father might with a son he never thought would grow this tall. On the steps of Baelor, the High Septon stood sweating under the sky's indifferent eye and waited for Lord Tywin. He had prepared 3 sermons and a complaining cough and the sort of look that had cowed strong men when they were boys. Tywin came without an extra cloak or a sword or any of the things powerful men adorn themselves with when they would like to look more like statues and less like men. He came with paper. "You will speak to your flock about quiet," Tywin said. "You will use the word submission. You will use the word peace. You will say that we do not speak of old sins because they are the bread of the envious. You will bless the ovens. You will bless the hands that knead. You will call the right of trial by combat the mercy of the gods. You will call loose tongues serpents." He handed the old man a sheet neatly written in a hand no clerk could imitate. "You will read this if you cannot be trusted to speak it." The High Septon bristled. He had become high by bristling, after all. "Do you command the 7 now?" "I command their bell," Tywin said, with that tiny nothing of a smile. "And their bell commands men. The gods can take care of themselves." When Tywin had left him, the High Septon looked at the paper and saw that it was good, if not holy. He thought of his breakfast, an egg that had decided to be only half of what an egg should be, and he thought, very briefly and with shame, that he would have preferred a second egg to a quarrel. He tucked the paper into his sleeve. He would preach the words and tell himself later they had always been his own. News travels on the backs of birds and barges and men who have no better use for their mouths. It reached the eyrie wrapped in frost and made of string. Sansa heard it in a courtyard where a falcon made a noise like silk tearing. Peter Baelish told her in the way a man tells a girl something to see how it fits on her. "The mountain is dead," he said. "It is remarkable how few hills remain once you have climbed above them." Sansa's hands were hidden in her sleeves. She had learned that at King's Landing, hands betray. She thought of Tyrion's small, intense face, the way his eyes made sense of the world even as his mouth made jokes about it. She thought she should feel glad for him and found the old fear come like a mouse into a pantry. Quick, uninvited, dangerous to your stores. She pushed the fear down into the dark where mice live. "Does that mean the imp is free?" she asked, careful with the sobriquet, because she had learned that among men you must sometimes speak their words to make them think their thoughts are your own. "It means many things," Littlefinger said, smile neat as a seam. "Among them, that some men who thought themselves above the telling of stories will learn they are made of words after all." Sansa looked out over the vale and thought of mountains and men named for them, of snakes and the way they leave their skins in long tatters on rocks. She thought of Elia Martell, whom she had never seen, and tried to imagine a song for her that was not only lament. She tried to imagine a world where words could lay stones where no road had been, and men had to walk on them because there was no other way across. That evening, when the light grew thick again, Oberyn and Illyria sat with candles that burned low and spat occasionally as if they too had opinions. They drank a wine from the reach that tasted of grass after rain, and a wine from Dorne that tasted of the same grass when the sun had set it on fire. They said nothing for a long time, and in the saying nothing made an agreement that did not need to be written. They would not leave this city yet. They would not allow it to forget what the mountain said, but they would be clever about whose ears they borrowed to keep the sound going. "Tomorrow," Illyria said at last, "we will go to the Street of Silk and ask the women there what they heard. They are the best a city has for bells." And after, Oberyn said, "We will go to the Street of Steel and ask the men who make knives what shape a blade takes when it is meant for a belly and not a throat." Illyria smiled. "The same shape," she said. "It is the hand that changes." "Then we will study hands," he said, and took hers and turned it palm up, and read the lines like a maester reads the weather. "There is a storm," he said, "and you will stand in it and laugh because water makes you hungry." "I am always hungry," she said, "but I like bread." "Bread is fashionable," he said. "Bread is necessary," she said. "Fashion is for ladies who have never learned to eat with their fingers." She raised his hand to her mouth and kissed the place where the spear formed calluses. "Go to your cliff," she said, meaning Tywin, meaning iron. "Look at it, call it by its name, and then turn away. The sea does the rest. It has time." Oberyn nodded. He had never lacked for patience where pleasure was concerned. He had learned, this week, the taste of a different patience. It tasted like choosing not to put his spear where his arm knew it would slide true. It tasted like holding a word between his teeth until it warmed, and then pronouncing it as a blessing rather than a curse. He would practice that too, because a man should not put down a weapon until he has learned to wield it. On the morrow, men would come with petitions, and women with baskets, and songs would be played badly in taverns whose owners had once pretended they did not like Dornish music and now found it profitable to be fond. A boy whose hair had been cut too close would blow a reed pipe at the foot of the Tower of the Hand and play 3 notes wrong and smile for each wrong note as if he had intended it. Tywin would sign papers and not think of the yard when he could help it, and when he could not help it he would take a breath and make the memory another thing he had refused to fear. Jaime would put his left hand to work again and discover a new ache in his shoulder and find that he liked the ache better than the old emptiness. Marjorie would set a flower on a boy's chair and watch him see it and not know he had seen it and be content. Varys would send a little bird with a broken feather to a place he had not sent a bird before. Bronn would collect a purse from a man he did not yet know would pay him to do something ugly that would not turn out quite as the man expected. The Hound would knock on a door with his boot and not kick it in. Arya would add a name to a list she did not say aloud and subtract another again just to feel the subtraction. And beyond all of them, in a room full of cloth and instruments that had the innocent, wicked look of toys, Qyburn would set a thread and pull it through and hum a tune he had learned as a boy in Old Town, a simple hymn about bread and mercy. He would hum it as he made something with no mercy in it at all, because men cannot help themselves. They sing while they sow and forget that they sometimes sow stones. The city slept in pieces and woke the next day in different pieces, like a board game moved by many hands. What had seized it yesterday remained in it, like a thorn under skin. Bodies have a way of healing around such things. Sometimes they push them out. Sometimes they do not. Sometimes they carry the thorn a long way and tell themselves the pain is a charm. Sometimes they forget it entirely until the day comes, years later, and the flesh opens of its own accord to make room for the thing the body remembers. Tyrion dreamed again, toward dawn, that he stood on a beach made of ground bread, and the tide came in red and friendly and took his feet but not his ankles. The sea smelled of oranges and iron. When he woke he could not say whether he had been happy in the dream, only that when he walked to the window and pushed it open he found the air sweeter than it had any right to be, and somewhere very low in the street a woman selling honeycakes called out a price 3 coppers lower than yesterday's, because bread had been cheap and she had woken with a feeling that the world might be a little less dear for a day. He smiled at the sound. He put his hands on the sill. He did not speak. He did not need to. The city knew his name again, and that knowledge would be a crown and a noose by turns. He would wear it a while and see which he preferred.